T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff. Go Falcon, go hard.
Vehicles fishing downrange.
Chamber pressure's nominal.
T plus 30 seconds, and Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. We're carrying the two O3b mPOWER satellites. We've heard the initial call out. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal, and the Falcon 9 is beginning the pitch downrange.
Power and telemetry nominal.
Avionics confirms power and telemetry coming from the second stage are nominal on Falcon 9. We're into the throttle bucket right now.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
We've heard the call. We're supersonic. And engines have throttled back up as we're coming through the period of maximum dynamic pressure. Guidance officer calls out max Q, confirming we're through the period of greatest stress. 9 Merlin engines running at full power. Now on your screen, you can see on the left the speed and the altitude of the first stage. Stage separation will occur at about 8,200 kilometers per hour. And in order to get into the initial orbit, what we call the parking orbit, the Falcon 9 has to gain enough speed to reach about 27,000 kilometers per hour. That's a bit under the 17,000 miles per hour used as a rule of thumb for the low Earth orbit velocity. Now we've got several events coming up in about half a minute. We're going to have main engine cutoff. Then a few seconds later, we get stage separation. And then the second stage engine start number 1 called SES 1. During main engine cutoff, we're going to shut down the 9 Merlin engines. Then we'll get the stage separation. And once we're separated, take a look. In the daylight, you should be able to see the view of the first stage as we begin a slow flip to orient the first stage back towards Earth, while simultaneously the MBAC engine on the second stage will ignite for the first time.
Miko. Stage separation confirmed. MBAC ignition.
We've heard it and seen it. We've got successful main engine cutoff, stage separation, ignition of the second stage engine. Nice views late in the afternoon as we're leaving Florida, and maybe even a little bit of the contrail visible in the distance behind the second stage nozzle. And on the left side, you can see the first stage. Coming up now is fairing separation, about 5 seconds.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Well, we saw in the background the fairing separate. As we had mentioned at the start of the webcast, the payload adapter we use for the mPOWER satellites blocks the view of the camera, which is one reason the webcast will be ending once the first stage lands and the second stage gets into its parking orbit.
Vehicles are on a nominal trajectory.
GNC with the right call out, we're on nominal trajectory. We're coming up on 4 minutes into today's mission. Now, as I mentioned, if we were bringing the first stage back to a land landing, we'd do what we call a fast flip. That would quickly turn the stage around. But we're going downrange to the drone ship, so we do a more leisurely flip, and it's not quite as fast as we would do for a land landing. In fact, you can see the stage is slowly rotating. It's moving at a speed less than 1 degree per second. Now, coming up in 2 minutes, we expect to have views of the first stage's entry burn. And in the entry burn, we'll relight 3 of the M1D engines on the first stage. We start with the center engine, what we call E9, and then we follow it up shortly afterwards with engines 1 and 5. And that'll slow down the vehicle as it gets ready to pass back into the Earth's atmosphere. Now we need to slow down in order to reduce that re-entry heating, and that ultimately helps us to recover and reuse the first stage. Now if you've been watching, on the left side you'll notice the altitude of the first stage has reached its peak. I think it got to about 123 kilometers, and now it's beginning the trip back down to the Earth's surface. Now it took us about 2 minutes from stage separation until the first stage reached its maximum height, and it's going to take us another 2 minutes to come back down to the altitude where the entry burn begins. Now this portion of flight is in the vacuum, and you can see the grid fins on the first stage view from the interstage camera. Not right now, we're looking on the inside of the interstage, but on the outside you can see the grid fins. They don't have a function right now. They're deployed, but there's no atmosphere for them to react with. The grid fins come into play after the entry burn once we start to bite into the Earth's atmosphere. Now during the entry burn, Falcon 9 is going to be decelerating by firing its Merlin engines, but it's not slowing down all that much. It's bringing it somewhat down, but that means that we're going to fly through Merlin's exhaust gases, what we call the rocket's plume. And that's what deposits that layer of soot on the vehicle tanks, which is why our flight-proven vehicles look so sooty. That comes from the fuel that Falcon 9 uses. Coming up in about 10 seconds, we should have entry burn. We'll wait for the call out, see if we can spot it on the camera.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Stage 1 FTS is safed.
Entry burn's begun. The center engine is lit. That's kind of the circular plume. And now engines 1 and 5 come in, and that's why the plume changes shape that you can see on your screen. Waiting for entry burn shutdown.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
On time, we've got shutdown. Entry burn looks good. So now that we've completed the entry burn, the first stage begins entering the Earth's atmosphere. Now the maximum deceleration is going to happen in about 15 seconds. The first stage will experience about 5 Gs, but because we perform the entry burn, this portion of flight is not as difficult for the first stage. If we didn't have the entry burn, the first stage would have a tougher time coming in for the landing without compromising reusability. And reusability is key to lowering the cost of spaceflight.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Now coming up next, we've heard terminal guidance on second stage. We're now controlling the angular momentum state of the second stage. We're going to get MVAC engine shutdown in about 20 seconds. And then right after that, we should get into the landing burn sequence on first stage. Reminder, the first stage
2 FTS
is targeting a drone ship landing out in the Atlantic Ocean. Waiting for the call out for SECO.
MVAC shutdown.
We've got MVAC engine shutdown.
Nominal parking orbit. Stage 1 landing burn.
And both call-outs right on time. Guidance reports a nominal parking orbit for the second stage. The first stage has begun the landing burn. Headed to the drone ship on the power of the center engine E9.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
All right, and we have touchdown of formerly new booster on the drone ship out in the Atlantic. So there you have it. That landing marks SpaceX's 385th recovery of an orbital class rocket. That includes first stage landings for both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. Meanwhile, the second stage, there's a great view, and I think in the distance you can see a little bit of the contrail in the upper atmosphere as we headed east out of the Cape just before sunset. And so we're watching the last glow of the sun as the second stage heads eastward into the shadow of the Earth. So second stage embarking now on the initial coast phase. The view you're seeing there, that's the payload adapter. The mPOWER spacecraft are just on top, but they're hidden from view. And so with that, we're not expecting to have great views of payload deploy, and we're going to end the webcast at this point. But keep an eye out on our X account for confirmation of payload deploy. That comes around the T+2 hour mark. With that, we want to thank you for joining us for SpaceX's 128th launch of 2024. All of us here at SpaceX want to give a big thank you to our customer SES for entrusting us with today's mission and for their ongoing partnership. We also want to thank Kennedy Space Center, the Eastern Range, and the FAA for supporting today's launch. And as always, thanks to all our viewers for logging on and your continued support. Remember to follow @SpaceX on X for launch updates. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon.